I'm Carol Levin, and I'm a trustee of the New England Coalition, and I so very much welcome all of you who came tonight. I'm really glad that you're all here, and Stephen's upstairs with the door. This is a lovely gift to the community from the Brattleboro Savings and Loan, is to have this community room available. It's just with a little bit of tricky things because they can't leave the bank door open. Because it sets off all the alarms. But we're grateful that they provide it to the community at no cost to nonprofit groups that want to do things here. So we thank them very much, and we're glad that you're all here. And I'll just point out trustee members. Clay Turnbull is a trustee. Jim Kirby is a trustee. And where am I here? Ned Childs is a trustee, and Ray Shadis. Tap his microphone.
Trustee.
Ray Travis is a trustee, which Ray Shadis. Excuse me, Ray. I know better.
Calm.
I'm multitasking.
And Carol is a trustee.
And I am a trustee, yes. Lori is in Florida on the beach, and Jake is up in northern Vermont. So he's there. Those are our other two trustees. Welcome, come on in. Hey, welcome, Alon. Okay, we're just getting started. So this is a community meeting to talk about goals on what we as a community can begin to do with or without the New England Coalition, but hopefully with the New England Coalition, on getting Entergy to decommission Vermont Yankee and not put it into Safe Store or SAF Store, whichever way you want to pronounce it, for 60 years, which is bizarre. So I'm going to actually turn this over to Ray, who's going to start off our program here, and he has a short slideshow.
And here's Ray.
Do I have to talk into that? I have this thing.
Got that one. Let's see.
Yeah, right. Well, let's just see if we can't project. We thought we'd structure this as a dialogue because it seems the best way for people to be able to accept new information. And what good is information if it's not new information? And basically, if you come to some new perceptions and some conclusions, assumptions of your own, all the better. So I hope that you will feel free to interrupt, to ask questions, not only of me and the NEC board, but of each other. If it works like that as we go along. And this is important, and this is maybe the first of any number of meetings that we hope to put together and to participate in as other organizations put together meetings, and they have. There's been a lot of talk around the state about the Vermont Yankee decommissioning. It's in a time of crisis, sort of a crunch point. It's debatable as to whether the train has left the station on decommissioning or not. Is there anything left on the menu for legal action, for intervention, for political action, or not? Or is it a matter of trying to apply some sort of moral suasion on a company from Mississippi, Louisiana, that is now in the catbird seat. If you review the regulations and look at the federal court's decisions on preemption, in which Vermont took a real beating, there really doesn't seem to be much. The decommissioning legal process was changed in 1996. Prior to that, and also the main Yankee decommissioning, came in under rules that were put together in the mid-1980s. And at that point, if the public were concerned and wanted to exercise their hearing rights, if they wanted to bring issues forward in an atmosphere of documentation, of sworn testimony, of cross-examination, they could do so, and do so in a rather informal way compared to the strictures they're held to now. New England Coalition intervened in the Yankee Roe decommissioning, and at that time we filed our intention to intervene, and we were obliged to file what they called aspects. What are the general topics? What are your general concerns that lead you to want to intervene? You know, and if the NRC found that they had any substance, then you were accepted as an intervener, and at that point, you could go out and round up experts, find evidence, documentation, and then lay out your specific contentions. We believe that the company is not taking into account a certain contamination or a certain range of radionuclides, whatever it may be. It got very specific. Today, if you want to intervene, if you want to get involved in actually arguing about, in an effective way, about how the decommissioning is being conducted, you have to front load your application to intervene with the very specific statements, and they have to be backed by expert evidence, or excuse me, expert testimony or abundant evidence if you don't have an expert. And then maybe what you say will be entered in the record and taken seriously and debated before a three-judge panel. The other little trickster in the game is that in the prior period, in the prior period, when a company was going to undertake decommissioning, about 2 years after they announced that they had defueled the reactor permanently and they were going to go into decommissioning, they were required to produce a license termination plan. That was an iterative document. It would change over time, and it was really follow the bouncing ball to try to argue about their plan. But when they filed that, within 2 years of getting into the planning, the NRC would announce an opportunity for a hearing. And it'd be announced in the Federal Record, now you may try to intervene. It's 2 years. The new scheme is no formal hearings until 2 years prior to license termination. So, in this case, what's 2 years prior to 2075 or whatever the hell it is? There will be no formal hearing on the record until the company gets ready to ask for the license termination. They may conduct decommissioning activities or not in the time frame prior to that, but there'd be no hearing on it. So if they decide to, for example, as we did at Maine Yankee, they decide to use explosive demolition of contaminated buildings, quick way to take them down, there'll be no hearing. Unless people can effect a rules change at NRC, which is always a possibility, and there's a process for it. It's a legal process. Or we catch on to the tail end of nuclear waste siting at the plant. The company's going to build, as you know, the company's going to build an additional site for long-term, maybe permanent storage of the high-level waste. Concrete pad to hold those casts. I believe that they may need to file for a license amendment to do that. There are two processes for putting one of those waste storage sites in place. There is an informal process in which their operating license is amended. That's their Part 50 operating license. There's a whole nother section of law, which is Part 72. These are all Chapter 10 of the Code of Federal Regulations. But anyway, there's another section of law in which they deal only with storage of nuclear waste. They don't mention operating plants. That section is not a simple amendment to the license. That section requires a new license, and so it requires extensive site survey under the National Environmental Policy Act. It requires that the company look at alternatives. I believe that it may be in the best interest of the town of Vernon and Windham County to find some local site other than that narrow strip of property fronting the Connecticut River and 500 yards from the grade school in which to store waste. It may be a site that could be better protected and might be above the 500-year floodplain. So, those are considerations. It could be that most people would consider that a terrible idea, but it's the kind of consideration that's specific enough to form a contention to get a hearing, at which point the citizenry or the state or the interveners can pry information out of the company. The process called discovery still exists in that formal hearing. Otherwise, what you have at hand is whatever the company would like to tell you. I don't know how many of you have been to the recent few hearings or to the meetings of the state's decommissioning advisory panel, but it is whatever they say it is. And if you ask for documentation, you may or may not get it. So now, for example, we've discovered that there is a strontium contamination in the soil, on the, ostensibly between the plant and the river. And we don't know how close, well, first off, we don't know where it came from. Secondly, we don't know how far it has migrated thus far, or how much it is spreading. And worst of all, we don't know how close it is to penetrating the aquifer, the lens of water that has so far not shown any contamination. The groundwater has, which flows below the surface, but not the aquifer, which is a lens of water deep below the plant, and it's also a lens of water that municipal and domestic water sources draw on in the village. That's pretty serious stuff in the law, and it's serious stuff for any environmentalist to be concerned about. So, I think that I'm going to do what I'm going to do, which is essentially be filing within the next few days looking for a formal proceeding for citing that waste as a legal handle on the company. Way to get their attention. In the meantime, however, I think there are better legal and technical minds than mine in the community. And I think they really need to explore not just the Vermont Yankee decommissioning, but decommissionings that have happened in the past and decommissionings that are going on elsewhere around the country.
Such as in Illinois at Mount Zion. They were
Just Zion.
It's Zion. Somebody was saying that that's setting a precedent.
The Zion plants in Illinois, there are two plants. They were put in safe store a decade ago or more. The company found that the costs of maintaining the plants in safe store was not allowing their decommissioning, the vested decommissioning funds to grow. In fact, it looked like it was going to be depleting that fund prior to the time for entering into complete decommissioning. They put together a scheme in which they created a separate new company, transferred the title temporarily to the new company. The new company wants to do a demonstration project and employ a lot of what was learned at Maine Yankee and Connecticut Yankee and the rest of the full-scale early decommissionings. And they think that they can come in for 2 nuclear plants at somewhere between $800 and $850 million. That's as opposed to $1.24 billion for this single 600 megawatt plant here. There are extenuating circumstances and circumstantial factors, and there's a whole lot to be calculated in there. But when you just look at the raw numbers, you would say, what the hell? How can this be?
They're different made-up numbers.
Well, they're doing it, and the company which is called Zion Solutions, the company that's running that decommissioning, is struggling to make their estimate. But they're not struggling $400 million worth, or $600 million, which would take them up to the Vermont Yankee thing. So what I'm saying is, not only does it bear looking at, but it bears looking at in a very public way.
Yeah.
I got a slideshow.
Michael, I have a question. Go, Michael.
Yeah.
Are we,
And
are we
Harold?
talking strictly NRC when we talk about them having complete control over the entire process? Or does DOE have any say in it, especially now that there's these lines of credits, there's these lawsuits for not taking the waste to Yucca and all the rest? Is there any other front besides this deaf ear of the NRC who's gotten painted into a corner by the lack of a waste policy?
Yes, there's some sharing of authority, if you will, control, with other federal agencies. There's almost zip in terms of the state.
Oh, yeah, no, I got the state thing. They made it loud and clear they were turning a deaf ear to the state.
Well, other states have put their oar in the water and managed to get away with it. The state of Massachusetts, many years ago, when they were decommissioning Fort Devon, is that right?
Yeah.
Fort Devon, military base. They set up a residual radiation standard. How much radiation are you going to leave behind? They set up a standard that was very strict. At the time, there were no NRC standards, but they were approximating 20 units of radiation per person per lifetime, or per year, excuse me. And the state of Massachusetts came in at 10.
Well, what was
But
the
they-
source of
well-
radiation at Fort Devon? That wasn't a
We-
reactor.
the military weapons, but basically, what the state of Massachusetts did is they said, we're not going to interfere with this license. We're not involved with this plant while it's shutting down this facility. We're only interested at the day that they give up their ownership or their tenancy. And so they have a tenancy law that says you will not leave it unless it's this clean. And for our purposes, that's 10 millirem from all pathways, no matter where the radiation may come from on site, and 4 millirem for water. That's the standard that the state of Massachusetts applied for Yankee Roe. And the owners of Yankee Roe decided not to fight it. We don't know what would have happened had they invoked federal preemption, but they decided not to fight it. The same thing is true of Connecticut Yankee, and in Maine Yankee, us citizens negotiated that cleaner standard with the company, and then we insisted on putting it into law. So the company fought us. Pardon me?
They weren't merchant plants, correct?
That's correct.
No.
Right.
But that doesn't make any difference because the legal attachment had nothing to do with the plant being part of the rate base, which Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee, and Yankee Roe were. It had to do with where the plant was sited. It was within the state.
Fort
And-
Devens.
Yeah. Well, and Fort Devon was in Massachusetts. So basically, the merchant plant issue had nothing to do with that. The merchant plant issue, though, is important. Merchant plant is a standalone commercial operation. It doesn't belong to an in-state corporation. It is not part of the rate base. In other words, your fees on your electric bills are not added to maintain the plant. But rather, it really has no responsibility to report to anyone except the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the NRC, and EPA, if there are non-radiological issues. It makes it important because Entergy cannot reach back in to the rate base to collect money to spend on anything at that plant. The only way it could get money for that plant was either by tapping the parent company, tapping the funds coming into other plants that it owns, or, what else?
Tapping the trust fund.
Well, the decommissioning fund. And that is debatable. I mean, there is an open area
I think the state
for discussion
plans to
there.
fight that, right?
I think the state has already registered its objections. As you know, Entergy would like to draw on the trust fund to take care of the fuel. This has been specifically forbidden by NRC, but NRC is famous for making exceptions, exemptions, and changing its mind.
Rolling over.
Well, they're there to help make the companies run. And
Rolling over.
so,
I had a
Complicated.
I had a question. I'm wondering if there was any, if anyone had looked into the commercial, the aspects of commercial law. I mean, if Keebler Cookies was producing something that was carcinogenic, they would be taken off the, you wouldn't be able to buy them anymore. I'm just wondering if there was any looking into that aspect of the fact that they're a commercial enterprise and they're putting out things that are potentially carcinogenic.
I'll give you a real short answer on that.
No.
In cases where the laws conflict, the existing federal law dominates. So those considerations, any health considerations, any radiological considerations are field preempted. NRC owns the field. It's a football thing, I think.
What was,
Yeah.
and behind, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Not behind you, Jim.
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant, but I understand because the feds dropped the ball on putting this radioactive material any place, they give a heap of our money, to places like Entergy. I'd like to know how much that is, how often it happens. It's our money. Do you know anything?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you talking about subsidizing the nuclear industry?
Well, she's,
Suing the DOE, probably.
they to recover their costs on managing the spent fuel,
Right.
that's right. This is the, they say the government didn't do its, uphold its part of the bargain and take away all the spent fuel by 1998. So these companies are incurring costs every year that they can decide whatever that cost is. They can make it a really big number and say, now you owe us this money and sue for it and get the money back without interest. But they like to say, oh, well, we're not sure we're gonna get that money back, but it's in the range of, I don't know, Leslie, you might know, like $50 million for 4 years of managing the fuel, something, it's big numbers.
It's big numbers.
And it looks like just a scheme to just fleece the government for money.
So I think this might answer your question too. The money that we've given, that we've paid as ratepayers to take care of the fuel, the spent fuel, that money is sitting in some federal account, the name of which is, fill me in, you know, it's this account
actually in
that
a
has all the money in
Waste
it.
trust fund.
It's in a bank.
Generating interest and
It's in a
all
bank.
that.
It's in a bank. Well, it's the federal, so,
The super fund?
No, it's
No.
a nuclear
Global
waste.
it's the National
Oh, the waste fund.
Nuclear Waste
I would be,
Fund.
no, you're talking about the decommissioning trust
Yeah.
funds in a bank. The nuclear waste
Right.
handling trust fund that's been added on a penny per kilowatt for every utility that sells nuclear power since whenever they turn them on. It was like $27 billion notional amount. Because it's probably like the Social Security account. You probably look in that box where all that money's been going, it'll be an IOU. It won't be any money at all.
It might behoove to go ahead and explore that and come up with a breakdown, because for 35 years or longer, 40 years, we've paid a mill rate on our electric bill, some small amount on our electric bill that has gone into a national nuclear waste fund, much of which was spent on trying to develop a final repository, Yucca Mountain. Several billions of dollars went into that. My guess is that the current funds that DOE is drawing on are taxpayer money.
Well, the point is they also stopped collecting that money in 2005 or 2008.
That's right.
There was a lawsuit that, well, you've collected this money and you haven't produced the service, so therefore you don't get to collect that money.
Did any of that help?
But you're on the right track that it's kind of a scam.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I think.
Yeah. It's kind of like the whole business. the
Jim?
business.
You got-
Ray, the fact that the first ISPAS pad was designated as a temporary site, is there any opening now that these pads are gonna be, can be permanent sites? I mean, DOE is not saying they're going to be permanent sites, but they're saying they have the ability to be permanent sites. And that's different than what was talked about when when the first pad was approved.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. We talked about the longevity of storage when they went before the Public Service Board to get a certificate of public good for the first pad. And at that point, there were NRC spokespeople going around talking about 100 or 125 years. I think that in the end it was indeterminate, not permanent, but for an undetermined period of time. And I think we had an argument with the Public Service Board over whether indeterminate meant permanent or not. So the board was very interested in giving Entergy what it wanted at that point, because had it refused a CPG for the pad, they would have been frustrating the federal scheme, and we would have been in the preemption fight. Yeah. So we got a menu here. We have a video, which is 4.5 minutes long, which has to do with a nuclear waste storage cask, all in one, which has gotten some fame here in Vermont recently. It's a German design. It's called the Cass Store. There's a really very bright activist out of California who has made this her crusade, and she's put together a website which is SOS, I think, .com. It's San Onofre Safety. And so she's got a lot of technical data, and Peter Bradford, former NRC commissioner, recommended her for a international roundtable that we had in DC, and he said, in his opinion, she was very informed. So it's a good, strong voice and something to be considered.
Is that a question?
Yeah, well, no, this would sort of interrupt you. So
No, go right ahead.
No.
You're supposed to interrupt.
You had said earlier something about one of the options was changing the rules of the NRC.
Yes.
Does anyone know what that all would entail? And
Yes. Yes.
Could you elucidate a little bit?
There's a simple
So-
formula, which is go to the NRC website, they have a whole section of called NRC regulation. And there's a whole section which is chapter 10, that has to do with radiation, and energy, the whole chapter. 10, part 2. Part 2 are the rules for engagement with NRC. So, and there's a section for what's required for filing a rules change petition. So it's 2.802 is a section. I know that. And locally, Sally Shaw is she in Gill? I
Gill,
think. Wrote a rules change petition. I think it had to do with fire protection, which was accepted. NEC teamed with a guy from Manhattan, Mark Lisi, and we filed a petition to change the maximum allowable core temperature in the reactor. And that has been under debate at NRC for the last 4 years, I think, and is still going strong.
Ray, I'd like to
So,
repeat her.
can be done.
The question was, because NRC rules seem to change, is there can you say it again? Is there a way to,
No, what would it entail to change the rules?
What would it
How big of a
entail?
pain is- you know, how huge is that? What lawyers does it involve? You know, like how difficult would that be?
so, because what would it entail to change NRC rules? Does it take lawyers? Does it, what's involved?
Like I just said, Sally Shaw got a successful rules change petition in.
By yourself.
Yeah, and
So-
on the other side of that, sure. I mean, NEC is currently involved in a frustrated rules change petition dealing with how long nuclear waste is going to be safely stored. Called I didn't forget what
Waste confidence.
the waste confidence rule, right? So we've been grouped with a group of 30 organizations nationwide that has been fighting that fight, and we have a team of excellent lawyers, thank God, paid for by Sierra Club and some other funded organizations. But yes,
Fighting
it's
that.
not completely inaccessible. In fact, if you go to the NRC website and just put rules change in their search window, they have a guy that's on standby to help people write rules change petitions. He'll tell you what you need to put in and not put in.
Leslie, you had a comment.
Well, if you're talking about changing the decommissioning rules in a very broad sense, the NRC has been looking at that supposedly since 2002. So a reply might be, we're working on that.
Yeah.
They were supposed to have a meeting last week with NEI, which is the chief trade group for the nuclear industry. The NRC meeting with the industry to talk about changes that they want in the decommissioning rules. So my question is, they're meeting with NEI. Well, it was an open meeting. You could call in and, well, you couldn't speak, but you could listen to the meeting, which, it's very easy to do.
Yeah.
And then you just put it on speakerphone and go about doing your, whatever it is that you're doing, if you have the time. So I do it all the time. It's possible. But you also know that they're going to say what the public can hear. But it got canceled because Washington got like a half an inch of snow. So I'm waiting for them to reschedule it. But if NEI meets with the NRC to talk about decommissioning, I think, the states there is a governor's association. They should meet with the NRC and talk about it. The legislative council should meet with the NRC and talk about it. Advocates, safe energy advocates should be able to meet with the NRC and talk about it as well. So that's an idea that's been rumbling around in my head in terms of getting involved in that process.
Sounds right to me.
Because we all know we're in a very unique, different situation here in Vermont that they haven't really looked at before, and we're used to speaking our minds, and a lot of people in other states aren't. So we need to kind of step up into that level of responsibility, I think.
So they make it look like there are avenues to change their minds, and in fact, indeed, there may be, but the weight of the evidence is that they make it awfully easy for industry to continue contaminating the biosphere and acting like it's no big deal, and covering up the negative consequences of the uranium folly. We're still alive.
No,
we are
no.
still alive.
No.
Go ahead, let's hear it.
It's built, whatever you can accomplish with NRC or any of the other federal agencies is built in bits and pieces. And, to revisit the decommissioning rule is a really big deal. It's complicated. It's really big.
It's really big.
But to revisit some specific part of it, timing and so on, I mean, there's NRC case law. NRC has its own.
Can you finish that sentence? To affect some part of it, would you say is doable? Is that? I think
That's not the kind of interruption I was talking about, Clay. No, I mean, it's, cut me a little break. Let's go with the program. The whole rule is huge. There are lots of issues within that. NRC, as you know, maybe, has its own judges, its own judicial panels that review various interveners' contentions. One ruling that I found interesting was that interveners may not question, at least not within, and may not enter contentions, regarding the licensee's choice of timing of decommissioning. Their court has already ruled against, arguing that a plant should be decommissioned promptly as opposed to going into safe store. There may be ways to break that lock, but that's an issue of real concern for this community, obviously. And yet, even if you manage to get into that legal process and enter a contention that says, because of the unique circumstances in this community, this thing ought to be decommissioned right now, there's no assurance that would be heard. My pitch is to give it a try. Secondly, these citizen initiatives, whether it's a rules change that applies to this plant or it's a safety petition that applies to this plant, whether they're successful or not, they are very effective means of putting pressure on the company. When the company has a couple of these petitions or these legal initiatives underway, it finds it distinctly difficult to borrow money, to make plans, to retain employees. I'm for the few things that I've been involved in with DY, I'm very proud of a letter they wrote in 2011, at the time we were having the federal hearings here in Brattleboro, in which they said, hey, it's been 60 months we're going into the 5th year here, maybe going into the 6th year, I guess, of litigation regarding our license renewal. And we find it hard to do finances, hard to retain or hire employees, hard to make business plans. In short, hard to conduct business because we're tied up in this litigation. I'm pretty happy with the results of that litigation, even though we were eventually ruled against. My feeling is it was one of those little darts, one of those little pinpricks that helped the company make up its mind to get out of town. I don't know.
But not take their uranium with them.
Well, that may take some more convincing. Let's take a look at this slide on these slides. We can run through them real quick because there's a zillion of them. These are photographs taken by the Maine State Nuclear Safety Inspector, who was on site throughout the entire decommissioning, and an avid photo taker. But just to give you some idea of what a decommissioning looks like, and maybe realize you'll be able to move it 40 years closer. The Maine Yankee last ran in December of 1996. In August, after they tried to sell the plant, after various schemes for resurrecting the thing and rewiring it, which it needed, they decided to defuel and decommission. Their motto was green in 7. It took closer to 8 years.
How many acres is the site?
The whole site is real big. It's like, if you can go back to that first slide, Clay, the
I don't know that I can.
the whole site is something like 700 acres, but that site right there is the industrial area of the site. That's it right there. That's the very top of the screen. There's a road that runs across the top of the screen that is a public road and runs down to a dock and that the fishermen use on that river. That site is about 13 or 14 acres only, but it's completely surrounded by water with the town road up at the top. There was a rectangle at the top of the screen, which is the waste storage site up to the right, that square, and the green thing surrounding it is an earthen berm, which we convinced the company to put in.
You did?
Yeah. There's no requirement for it. Our argument with the company, and it's different because the owner companies are still in the state of Maine, okay? They weren't from Mississippi or some other place. But we were able to convince the company that a quality decommissioning would stand the company better than a cheap decommissioning. I mean, they could say they saved money, they did it quick and cheap. And how would that look in a hearing room 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, as opposed to they did the best quality decommissioning they could, and they went beyond their environmental standards to satisfy community standards. We began to push that notion of community standards, and I recall the president of the company saying, Jesus, okay, we got federal standards, God damn it, we got state standards, and now we have community standards. When does it stop, you know? So yeah, we had those kinds of discussions.
And they eventually went along with that idea, it sounds like.
Yeah, we were able to negotiate a cleaner site standard, 2.5 times more clean than what the federal government required, actually the cleanest in the nation. We were able to negotiate different safety standards for that waste fuel site, an earthen berm around it. We got them to space the casks in modules so that if anything ever went wrong with any one of them, they could get heavy equipment in
That's what you mean.
and work on them without moving any. The company, because it was the company community advisory panel, flew us all over the country. We went to, one of the places we went was to the Palisades plant in Michigan, where they had their casks arranged in 2 rows, going back between 2 sand dunes on the shore of the lake, within the fail range of those sand dunes. In other words, if the sand dunes collapsed, they would cover casks. And we asked them, what happens if something goes wrong with one of those casks way in the back? How long would it take you to move each cask out of the way so you could get to that one in the back? And it would take 1 day per cask. It's a long time if you have one bleeding radioactive material. So in Maine, we talked them into putting them in modules.
So you could drive.
Get to each one. The other thing that they agreed to was a limit on the amount of flammable liquid in any vehicle, fuel. They agreed to a limit on the use of de-icing salts. We got that same agreement, by the way, with Entergy on the first spent fuel storage site here. No use of corrosive de-icing salts on the pad around the cask. You don't want it being sucked in to the cask as the air goes up through the cooling part of the cask. So you don't want it chewing up the metal in the cask. Yeah.
What's that there with their on their side?
Those are forms. The main casks were different than what they're using at Vermont Yankee. You can see the rebar?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the inside form. And that's like, that may be 3/4 of an inch of steel, that inside cylinder, and then the rebar, and then they put a form on the outside into which they poured the concrete. Then they took that form off the outside, so you have the concrete, then you have the rebar, then you have those inside casks. The Holtec casks going in at Vermont Yankee have 2 steel shells. They're each 1 inch thick, carbon steel. And they pour not reinforced concrete, but regular concrete in between those 2 steel shells. Then inside of that goes the canister, which is either 1/2 or 5/8 stainless on the sides, and the ends are thick. I don't know what they are, 2.5, 3 inches, 4, something like that. So there's 2 approaches to the cask.
These 2.
Yeah.
All the way to
Those things at the top are vents. At the bottom, there's a similar opening. They're covered with screen to keep out bats, rats, intruders, and leaves and stuff. So anyway, so the air that is drawn in, because of the heat of the cask, there's a column of air rising up inside of it. That air that's drawn in comes out about 40 degrees hotter than what is drawn in the bottom. And here I'll say something.
That's a lot.
And here I'll say something this is from way out there, okay? Many years ago, NEC had an annual meeting at Burlington, and Mary Olson from the Nuclear Information Resource Service came. She was one of our speakers. And as an aside, we were talking about these casks, and she said, see if you can find out what happened in Germany on the question of these casks that are convection cooled. That means there's moving air carries the heat away. because she had heard a little rumor that in Germany, when they were debating whether to use these casks or use the cast iron casks with no cast iron canisters with no cask around the outside, what some of the considerations were. And she said she had heard a rumor that some of the German scientists were concerned that the column of air moving up between the cask and the canister would draw microbial life along with it, and that would be irradiated through that long column of air as it rose up alongside the canister, and thereby mutated. And that was their concern, that this would be, in essence, a mutation engine, drawing critters in through the bottom, blowing them out the top, irradiated. I went after that, and I talked to a lot of German scientists, and I really couldn't get any answers from them. And I ran into one PhD who was living in exile in France, and he said he had moved to France to save his life, that his life had indeed been threatened because he raised that question not with respect to the convection cooled cask, but with respect to the castor cask, which, while it doesn't have an air column, there is something called laminar flow, which is the air that flows along the outside of the cask. And his question was, well, what does that do to the microbial life in the community? Aren't we risking something here? It's one of those fun things you run into.
I'd like to see if there's
Isn't there a
questions about
question
casks.
about the, in the hot water when it goes out, there's something, is it amoeba fowleri or something like that?
The hot water in...
Not to do with the cask, but there is something in the process of eliminating the hot water going into the river. There's amoeba fowleri, I think it's called.
You just mean temperature hot?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm dead certain there are issues with microbial life, and once through cooling is the question.
So
Yeah.
back to the casks. Questions about casks?
Ray, are you saying that the air that vents out the top actually has radionuclides in it?
No,
Then how would
because the radionuclides go through the canister and sink into the concrete. The steel, the radiation, direct radiation, gamma radiation, neutron radiation, penetrates the steel canister
And the concrete.
forms a radiation chamber in the air column between the steel canister and the concrete overpack. I asked the main Yankee guys about that, and they said, hell, Ray, there's enough radiation there to kill anything going through. Don't worry about it. So, yeah, that's,
Pretty.
yes, that's a ionization of the oxygen, I think, in the water. That's underwater. That's all underwater in the reactor vessel. Those are some of the internal parts of the reactor core, frames and holders and stuff that hold the fuel, and over time they become intensely irradiated. It's important because some of the most deadly radionuclides that come out of a reactor are what they call activation products. They're not part of the nuclear fuel. They're part of what was intensely irradiated and transmuted into a radioactive element. And so you'll find things like radioactive nickel with a half-life of 400,000 years, I think. Some of it was found in our river. There's been no effective analysis, sampling done in the Connecticut River. Not this end of it, anyway. Not at the Vermont Yankee end.
Do you know what
As
this
in,
is?
don't look for what you don't
Is
want
this
to
the
find.
cast?
Pardon me?
Is this the cast or is this the bolt shut kind? Do you know?
No.
No,
That is a
transfer.
National Assurance Corporation, NAC cask at Vermont Yankee being loaded underwater. You know, it doesn't look like it, but that's 20 feet of water over that cask. This is how these casks and the Holtec casks are filled. The fuel assemblies, the square things with the rods, are pulled out of their holding bins on the side. They're put into the canister. The canister is drawn up close to the top, but not totally at the top. A welding machine is lowered onto it, and a lid is welded onto it. The lid has 2 holes in it with 2 pieces of pipe coming out and 2 valves. I don't know, this kind of valve or what. 2 valves, 2 pipes. Then, and this is what will be done presumably at Vermont Yankee, then helium is blown into the cask, blowing the water out and sending it into filters. Okay. The helium is then returned to the cask and it circulates through until it runs dry, and then some, until the inside of the cask is totally evacuated of water. If they leave any water in there at all, the plutonium in the fuel pins swells up, it will bust pins, they can't do it. So they have to, and any pins that, fuel rods or pins that have pinholes in them, they go crazy with because it's really hard to get all the water out. You have to do it. It's a critical operation. The lid, the cask is then drawn up, the valves are now closed, and the ends of the pipe where the valves are, they put discs of metal on them and they weld that. So it is pretty well hermetically sealed.
Underwater, they welded underwater.
I don't know about putting the discs on the pins, but the top is welded underwater, yeah. Because you need the shielding. There is enough radiation coming out of the end of the canister, and I think that may be a radiation shield that they have that on. But there's enough radiation coming out of the end of the canister to really toast anybody that gets near it. So now it has been loaded, back that up for a second, has been loaded into the cask. The canister that you saw being lifted out of the pool is now in the cask. It now weighs over 100 tons. And that is the piece that Vermont Yankee did not test for.
Right.
They tested for a cask, but not one with a canister in it, so it's just an extra 30 tons. So they basically tested at 70% of load when they tested their crane. NRC needs to pay real close attention to these guys.
Well, by then, the dirty deed has been done, and it's too late to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think NRC had anybody watching the cask tests the last time around. Vermont had Aldous Spinogs down there, who thought everything was pretty good.
Yeah, that's all this for, yeah.
And-
So I have 2 questions.
Sure.
One is, what do they do with all that irradiated water? And the other is, when you get rid of the fuel pool, if there's a problem with the cask or the canister, how do you fix it without having access to a fuel pool? They bring in a really big portable hot tub.
They could
Right.
borrow, they could borrow the thing that the horse dives in from the tower at the carnival. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. They say
what
that
they-
there will be no problems and everything will be fine. And
We
there's no-
raised this issue at Maine Yankee, and they had proposed to provide an overpack, in other words, an upside-down cask, big enough to fit over the other cask, with portals that they could work through. They had promised to provide one of these things for the 3 Yankee plants. And I think they were going to keep it at Seabrook. So if there was an emergency of one of the plants, they could truck this thing up and plop it over the top, then figure out what to do from that point there, whether to introduce, I don't know what, frozen nitrogen or I don't know. But the upshot of it is that they delayed that, and then they delayed it, and I don't think they ever did it.
Right.
Um, So the game plan,
So the
I don't know, the
overpass,
president of the company said to me, Ray, he said, if we get a leak and get a hole in that cask, we'll walk up there with a caulking gun and shoot it full of caulk. End of story. Their idea, their scale on this stuff, there is completely at ends with that of most of us, you know. I think of having a tablespoon of radioactive crap spit out of a cask as a major production. They go like, I gotta dump some dirt on it, you put a piece of plastic over it, whatever. And they've been doing it and getting away with it for a long time. So, you know, I really don't know the answers to that.
how about the water? What do they do with all the water?
Water
If
is
it's in the fuel
filtered
pool?
in resin bed filters, the same kind of filters that these plants use in their circulating water in the reactor itself. You know, that stuff goes through the reactor, it's turned into steam, it's turned back into water, and it comes through the reactor again. In the meantime, it goes across resin bed filters that knock most of the radioactive crap out of the water, except for stuff like tritium, which they can't filter out.
But then what? What happens to,
Then you have a lot of radioactive
when you're taking the
contaminants
fuel
in the
pool
filters.
apart? When they take the fuel
Right.
pool apart, what do they do with all that water? Even if it's filtered, resin filtered and everything, does it just go into the Connecticut River? Does it get put into trucks and hauled to Texas? What happens?
Excuse me if I use the nuclear industry's terminology. It's filtered to release levels, and it's released.
And it's released, just released. So it goes into the Connecticut River.
That's right. So, yeah.
Okay, the next
Well,
one. I'm gonna be dead by then anyways, right?
you never know.
You never know.
Just roll on, just snapping right through there. These are pretty self-explanatory. There's your fuel grid.
Called the fuel bundle.
That's right, our fuel assembly.
So in Maine, did they just put it all in the bay?
No, the river, just kind of.
I'm sorry, the river.
Yeah. Except for what was filtered out of it.
And that
And then
went.
they have filters that go to Savannah, or whatever, some filter.
Texas, all right, you don't, Maine didn't have
Stored on
Texas.
site, pending future.
I ran into
Barnwell.
an invoice once in the Maine Yankee documents for 5,000 pounds of urea resin glue. I said, what the hell is this? And they had a major radioactive spill in the plant on concrete floors. And it was a liquid spill. So what they did was they took that powdered glue, like they used to use for wood glue, spread it all over, and then they took scrapers and they scraped it up and they packed it into canisters and let it set. And then that was shipped off to Barnwell. Yeah. Okay, these are turbine components. generator components. And at Maine Yankee, this stuff was either not radioactive or only nominally radioactive. At Vermont Yankee, it will all be radioactive.
Highly radioactive.
Well, but it will involve cleaning on site, removing as much radiation as they can. Some of our heavy radioactive components, like the reactor vessel head, went to a company down in Tennessee or Kentucky, I cannot remember which now, where they chiseled off 1/4 of an inch of the entire surface and disposed of that, and the rest of it went for scrap metal. It would show up in
Jewelry
your
you're wearing.
kitchen furniture.
I know.
Yeah. All right, let me just, let's focus this for just a second here. It's a very nasty job. And if you have a picture of them taking down the buildings section at a time, like the local boys take down a barn, well, some local boys, it ain't gonna happen that way. You know, it's a really nasty job. One of the problems is trying to characterize all this radiologically before you tear into it. You know, you got to get a Geiger counter, not just around the outside, but inside the piping, in the corners, in the crevices. A lot of radionuclides don't have a lot of penetration power, so they're really hard to find. They call them HTDs, hard to detect, hard to find. The strontium is one of those. It's a beta emitter. It doesn't go through a lot of thickness of material. So finding them is really hard. What Maine Yankee finally wound up doing is a lot of what they call rip and ship. They would characterize the outside of those giant pipes, or 30-inch pipes, I think. They would characterize the outside of those things, get a radiation reading on them. And if it was low enough, they wouldn't bother characterizing the inside. They would yank them out and ship them for disposal as radioactive waste. They'd go to a dedicated landfill somewhere in clay-lined or plastic-lined trenches. They'd be covered over, and somebody would be assigned to guard them until the company ran out of business, I think, something like that. But anyway, this is when the company starts revealing the details of how it's going to decommission. You want to keep these kinds of things in mind, you know. And it may be that you will have the opportunity, maybe it can happen, to have real public hearings about what they're going to do. And I guess it goes into storage as well. You can't decide you're going to store something for 45 or 50 years without characterizing its material integrity and how much contamination might be released if it fails. Yeah, this is one of the main supports for the turbine. Our turbine hull was quite high as opposed to the Vermont Yankee one. So the turbine was way up in the air.
Well, it looks really modern, doesn't it, this technology? Boy, it looks really efficient and low impact. Whose idea was it, anyway?
Well, there's explosive demolition. Those red flares are actually explosives. They're taking down the turbine hull. They were all the state inspector and a whole crew of engineers from Maine Yankee were in a corridor hallway in an adjoining building.
Yeah.
And when that turbine hull went down, the front wall blew off the corridor that they were in, and this cloud of radioactive crap, well, I say radioactive, they say clean. This cloud of stuff came at them, and they all had a scamper for the containment. That will maybe pop up somewhere.
By the way, the
Hop right along, please.
The Bank of Abu Dhabi a week or two ago went on record saying that oil cannot compete with solar PV electricity, even if it's $10 a barrel. That's an oil-rich bank.
These are steam pipes. They're 30 inches in diameter, and they run from the containment underground into the turbine hall. I don't want to cut Entergy any breaks, but when they said they didn't have any underground piping, that may have been their mindset, you know, that because those pipes were moved underground after the plant was built because they were vulnerable to aircraft impact or acts of terror, and they were safer underground because rupturing any one of them would have put the plant into an irretrievable meltdown spin. So, yeah.
Has anyone seen the videotape Deb Katz has of the takedown of Yankee Roe?
No.
Very different. Just get in there and tear it down.
Yep.
Guys not wearing masks, just blowing things up, just hitting it with big iron balls.
Yeah.
It was just a disaster.
Clean.
I think these are steam generators coming out of something that Vermont Yankee doesn't have because it's a boiling water reactor. This is the machine filled with heat exchange tubes where the steam from where the steam is generated, where the hot water from the reactor, pressure water reactor holds the water in it at 2,000 pounds per square inch, which does not allow it to boil. It's a super pressure cooker. And so that superheated water goes into this heat exchanger, and fresh water and tubes going in is turned to steam on contact with this superheated water. It is, just like Vermont Yankee, this heat exchange section is the pinch point for power uprates. Maine Yankee had a 10% power uprate, and it blew their steam generator tubes, and they had to replace them once, do a modification. They were considering buying new steam generators, and it was one of the big high-ticket cost items in a decision to close the plant.
Same thing as set it off, right?
Vermont Yankee, the pinch point is at the condenser, and it's been failing, and some of the employee reports that we got from that section through Discovery said, great, there's a plan for replacing the steam tubes, but no funding. Vermont Yankee. So, you know, in the neighborhood, if they did the whole thing, it would be like close to $100 million, and they didn't want to spend that in one lump. So that was part of the decision-making for closing the plant.
But the steam generator tube failure is what eventually led to Senate Offering being closed down.
Yeah.
Actually, it's rampant at all
But
pressurized water.
this is the reactor vessel. They filled it with water. They took high-pressure hoses, extremely high-pressure hoses, with water and a very hard, brittle grit, like a quartz grit, and stripped off. I have no idea how much, around 1/8 of an inch of metal from the inside of that reactor vessel. And the white that you see is kind of an quick after painting. the burnt areas, those are where the water entered and exited the reactor. Those are called nozzles, and they're burnt because they were cutting them free with torches. This is the whole thing being loaded on a barge. It was shipped down the local river. The state inspector told me that he could get a radioactive reading on the thing from the shoreline a couple hundred yards away.
That's the reactor?
That's the reactor.
Reactor
And
pressure
it's
vessel.
been filled with a very loose concrete they call grout. Very soft concrete.
That's the pressure vessel inside some overpack?
No, that's a pressure vessel. And God. So anyway, it went to down to Savannah River and up the Savannah River to be buried at the Savannah River site.
So it went down on the barge?
Pardon me?
It went down on the barge?
Went down on the barge.
Cool.
Down the inland waterway.
Intracoastal.
Interesting note, when it got to Savannah River, there was not enough water to float the barge up the river. They had to wait until the weather changed. Yeah.
So, Ray?
Yeah.
How much did those big pieces weigh? Couple hundred?
Hundreds of tons. Yeah. I
So-
think the reactor vessel was around 500 tons. That package.
So how big a piece of stuff can you move on a highway or train?
They wouldn't go down a highway or train. The
how's Vermont
Yankee
Yankee?
Roe reactor vessel went on a overland mover to the nearest railhead, I think, and then by rail. But it went on one of these things with like 100
Right,
wheel
yes,
trailer
yes,
things.
but do they, I guess maybe they had to get it in here so that they'd be able to get it out the same way. I mean, it
There's
wasn't
a rail
manufactured on
Came
site.
in, yes, it were two halves. There were two forged halves
Okay,
that were joined on site.
so you'd take it apart and you would be able to ship it on Main Central, on Main, on whatever it is? New England Central Railroad with ones with the rubber ties or not?
I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Any guesses what this is?
Ray's house.
My house.
That was a colonial homestead that had been redone a few times. That was part of the 700-acre parcel. One of the agreements we got from Maine Yankee was the donation. They weren't supposed to do that, and I was going to sue them. Was the donation of 200 acres of land, including that house and barn, to a local organization for the purposes of fostering dialogue on environmental issues and also to serve as a nature preserve. And we invited, it's just 200 acres, it's a peninsula completely surrounded by salt water, three sides. And we invited the University of Maine, College of the Atlantic, all the environmental organizations in the state, anybody that wanted to apply for it. The schools, the universities and stuff weren't interested. They had enough property and they had a hard time maintaining that. The property eventually went to a local environmental camp, Camp Chewonki, it's called, right next door to the nuclear plant. So they have it. But I wanted some respect paid to the house as a historical site, and you see what respect they paid it. The minute you let your thumb off these guys, they just go ahead and behave like delinquents. Yeah, buzz right along.
Ray, what about the concept that there's money in decommissioning? In other words, they form this LLC or an LLC on top of an LLC. It's going to decommission, and that they theoretically can't wait to get their hands on the decommissioning fund so that they can start making money that way.
Well, I think the decommissioning fund is secure. And I wouldn't, that's my own guess on that. The question of liability in all of this corporate, many corporate veils, one would want to take a look at the Public Service Board order in docket 6545, which was the sale case. And we had raised a lot of these issues in that case.
This is in 2002?
Yeah, 2001.
One. Okay.
And the board order memorializes a memorandum of understanding between the state and Entergy, which is a legal contract. And basically it says Entergy will be, if the decommissioning fund is insufficient by the time that they decommission, they will be allowed to put the plant in safe store and collect decommissioning funds. It also says that ultimately the plant is liable for all costs associated with the plant, and it goes ahead to name the parent corporation. I am not a finance guy, and that's not my area of concern, but you know, one might want to take a look at that because Entergy's statements, you know, that if there isn't enough money, we may be in litigation. You know, to my way of thinking, is direct confrontation to that.
It's interesting how that demolished containment ends up looking like the Hiroshima Peace Pagoda after the bomb was dropped. Kind of, it's sort of a hollow dome.
Those cars that were being loaded, those railroad cars, are being loaded with low level waste, and Class A, I think. Doesn't matter. They left the whole damn train parked on railroad tracks in the backyard of a suburban development for about a week and a half.
Nice. Because they were thoughtful.
Yeah. But Maine Yankee said it wasn't their fault, it was the railroad that was ignorant. They didn't understand what those radiation placards were about on every single car.
What about the colored flags? Do you know?
Yeah, that's radiological survey. And so what they've done is they've gone through there with a handheld detector, and the different color flags go down for whether they're above or below a certain threshold reading. Then they'll go back with more, if necessary, then they go back with more serious equipment, take samples, and put the samples through a lab counter.
Ooh.
Yeah. They were incredibly proud of this. The day that they decided to set off the explosives and bring down the dome, they invited everybody and anybody to come out to the plant and watch them blow up the dome. And there were workers and their families. There were people pushing baby carriages and strollers, and everybody was stopped about, maybe quite a distance, maybe 200 or 300 yards from where this thing was going to be brought down. And so we're all standing there, and kaboom, it goes down, and this huge cloud of concrete dust came out and just rolled right over the crowd, and you could just feel it on your, stuck on your forehead. And we were standing in front of the waste fuel at the time. But now they served hot dogs and root beer, and
How many people have
it was a
cancer?
big party. Pardon me?
How many people have cancer now?
Well,
A lot of people have cancer, but nobody has definitely tied their cancer to exposure to either the
There's
Yankee
not.
decommissioning, or the
Fire.
Chernobyl irradiation, or the
casting.
weapons testing, or the Fukushima irradiation.
I just want to show you this. This is
But a lot of people have cancer.
I'm sorry if I interrupt. This is a 4.5 minute flick. And the reason that this was a test that was done at Aberdeen Proving Ground about 10 years ago. And the reason it was done was because the cast store cask, this single big cast iron thing that is sort of now making a comeback, they had put out a couple of them at Surrey, Virginia, 1970s, I think. And nobody was interested in buying them. And one of the concerns was that they did not have any kind of overpack, that if they were hit with any kind of missile that could penetrate the cask, that was it. The Germans at the time were saying, well, there's nothing around that's going to penetrate this cask. An American company came up with a ceramic armor of some kind, and they wanted to make a ceramic armor shell to put around the cast or cask to make it more saleable. So they ordered up 2 tests at Aberdeen, one with this shell and one without. You'll see the one without. The one with the shell, the cask was only scorched and scratched. And what they fired at it was, they didn't fire it. They took the warhead out of a tow missile. This is something that you mount on a Jeep, or a couple guys carry it or whatever. But they took the warhead out of one of these missiles and just laid it on top of the cask, which is iffy because it's a shaped charge and it's got to be pointed in the direction you're supposed to point it. Anyway, so basically that's what they did.
What will we learn from this that will help us with Vermont Yankee?
I want to make a point.
Okay.
Okay, so
There's a point coming.
It's
All
my
right.
it's my point. A lot of energy is currently being put into promoting the cast or cask. We have 4 of our local legislators, Windham County legislators, had signed on to a letter to NRC saying, in essence, I don't want to belittle it, but in essence, give us the good cask, don't give us these crappy old thin metal casks, give us the good cask, the cast or cask.
Third world cast.
I just want to say that it's not by any means a perfect solution, and that some of its vulnerabilities and its issues are bound to surface as you go forward. Never mind that it's a pretty frustrating thing to try to get NRC to order a company to turn away from a cask that's already licensed.
Right.
So, anyway.
For almost 50 years, commercial nuclear power plants have been operating in the United States. Today, they produce nearly 20% of the nation's electricity, and more than 1/2 the electrical power in some regions. At utility reactor sites throughout the country, over 30,000 metric tons of spent fuel sit in temporary storage. Most facilities use wet storage ponds, which require the transfer of spent fuel into containers for further storage. To date, only a few American utilities employ special containers which can both store and transport nuclear spent fuel safely. Such containers have been the standard for the European nuclear industry for years. Subjected to rigorous testing, they guard against potential catastrophes in extreme situations. And now a new standard of safety for storage and transportation will be available in the United States.
We believe that we have a system which can provide the comfort of security against accidents or unanticipated violent activities for on-site storage of spent nuclear fuel.
Made from a single piece of ductile cast iron or forged steel, With 15-inch thick nickel-plated interior walls, the enhanced supercaster can both store and transport spent nuclear fuel. This is a rugged, durable, long-lasting container. Its integrity has been proven time and again in demanding tests, including blazing fires and temperatures of some 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and free fall from a height of more than 2,600 feet. Recently, the supercaster was put to another demanding test, this one on U.S. soil.
The first shot we will place on top, shooting straight down without any protection.
U.S. Army officials tested the cask's ability to withstand explosions of 2 anti-tank missile warheads. In the first blast, the cask was exposed without its standard protective covering.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
As expected, the ballistic perforated the cask and breached the cavity, demonstrating the weapon's intense explosive force.
This is a section of the initial development of the ballistic protection system that we're proposing.
For the second test, a section of protective cover was placed between the cask and the warhead. Such a flak jacket would encase the entire cask during the actual storage of spent fuel.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
International Fuel Container's enhanced supercaster withstood the blast. Once again, the missile penetrated the cask, but this time, neither the internal area where neutron shielding is located, nor the cavity was breached. Had spent fuel been in the container, nuclear contamination would have been averted. The American missile test underscores the risks of the current system of nuclear storage and transport in the U.S.
We must now take a closer look at on-site security because we may have containers for some numbers of years ahead stored on site with spent nuclear fuel.
It may be time for a new standard of safety. IFC, with the new supercaster and its enhancement, is ready to meet that standard.
With Dave Cavassier and Gwen Castaldi.
Scientists spent years trying to figure out what would happen to a shipment of nuclear waste in a big accident. Tonight, Dan Burns has details of a test to find out if a nuclear cask can survive the toughest test of all.
Scientists at Sandia Labs in New Mexico smashed a nuclear fuel cask on a truck into a wall. They did the same thing with a cask on a train. Then they crashed the truck and train together. But in one test, the cask proved to be a clear failure, a terrorism test.
One of the casks that was in fact used in the films that we've seen was used as a target for the attack. It was determined that it was possible to penetrate the cask.
Penetrating the cask wasn't easy, though. Here's a diagram of the test. Scientists shot a cask with some kind of cannon or rocket. They won't say what as a matter of national security. These are rare photos of the test. It was shot at on the top. You can barely see the damage just right of the center of the cask.
A hole was produced in the cask about an inch in diameter that would have let out some very small fraction of the contents of the cask.
Here's a better picture. Again, the hole is about 1 inch wide. Radioactive fuel rods usually look like this, clean and straight. Whatever the scientists shot into the cask ripped through the fuel rods inside. Most scientists think nuclear fuel casks can survive any transportation accident without opening. But these pictures prove something a lot of scientists suspected. If terrorists get a hold of a spent fuel shipment, the cask is not going to stop them. Dan Burns, News 3.
An interesting side note to the terrorist test. One report says if a terrorist ever managed to get a loaded spent fuel cask open, the radiation would kill him.
more than 100 nuclear power plants provide the electricity for 1 of every 5 homes and businesses in America. They are a vital part of our nation's future energy and environmental policy. Nuclear power plants are the nation's largest emission-free source of electricity because they don't burn anything to produce electricity. Used nuclear fuel is a byproduct of nuclear energy and is being managed effectively. America's used nuclear fuel management program includes shipping used fuel from nuclear plants to a remote underground disposal facility. Public safety is the priority every step of the way. It is ensured by a combination of protective measures. Super strong shipping containers that provide multiple layers of protection. Extensive planning and processes governing shipping routes, and comprehensive regulations governing all facets of this program. The result is that the public and the environment are fully protected. Since 1964, in the U.S. alone, there have been thousands of safe shipments of nuclear fuel over more than 1.7 million miles.
There have been more than 3,000 shipments of used nuclear fuel in the United States and more than 21,000 shipments of used nuclear fuel internationally. All of these shipments have taken place in containers designed to meet Nuclear Regulatory Commission or International Atomic Agency Commission standards. There's never been a release of the radioactive contents of a used nuclear fuel container during shipment. This record of safety is unparalleled when compared to other hazardous materials transportation shipments.
The first layer of protection is the packaging itself for the used fuel rods. Nuclear energy is generated using fuel pellets made of compressed uranium. These pellets are assembled into columns and inserted into zirconium alloy tubes. The tubes are sealed with end plugs to form a fuel rod. These fuel rods are then grouped into fuel assemblies. When the fuel is changed in the reactor, used fuel rods are cooled in steel-lined pools before transport by truck or by train in protective containers to safe storage facilities. When transported by truck, the shipping containers have a stainless steel basket that holds the fuel assembly firmly in place. 2 thick cylinders of steel surround the basket and form a cavity that is filled with lead which shields radiation. A steel lid then seals this cylinder. The outermost layer is a thick shielding material that prevents any release of radiation. The fuel assembly is then inserted into the container and the package is sealed securely with another steel lid. This sealed container is then carefully lowered onto a specially fitted flatbed truck and secured in place. Special impact limiters are installed as an additional safety precaution to absorb energy from any possible collision during transportation. Finally, a tarp or screen is added to cover the container en route. Rail containers are similar to truck containers but carry a heavier load, so they can hold more fuel assemblies. Used nuclear fuel is transported in certified containers. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has certified numerous container designs, which fall into 2 broad categories. The first incorporates 3 layers of metal, lead sandwiched between 2 layers of steel, and in the other certified design, the fuel is contained within 9 to 15 inches of steel. As a safety precaution, all rail transporters are required to have buffer cars between the used fuel cars and other rail cars. It is likely that most used fuel shipments to a federal disposal facility will travel by rail in the future.
Designers of used fuel containers will use both physical tests and computer modeling in order to show that the containers can withstand the hypothetical accident conditions.
The safety and strength of these container designs has been verified in numerous physical tests that far exceed regulatory requirements. These robust shipping containers are specially designed to withstand even the most extreme accident scenarios. Shipping containers have been loaded onto a truck that was crashed first at 60 miles per hour and then at 80 miles per hour into a 700-ton concrete wall. They have been broadsided by a 120-ton locomotive traveling at 80 miles per hour. Another physical test involved dropping containers in a 30-foot free fall onto steel-reinforced concrete, comparable to hitting a concrete slab head-on at 120 miles an hour. They've been dropped onto a 6-inch diameter spike, and the containers have been burned in a pool of aviation fuel for 90 minutes at temperatures of more than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The result in each case, there were no ruptures or significant damage to the used fuel containers themselves. Although dented and charred, the containers remained totally intact to protect the used fuel they would carry.
In the year 2000, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission released a report that re-examined the risk of used nuclear fuel shipments. In fact, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission found that using the most current analytical techniques and modeling, that the risks of used nuclear fuel shipments are even smaller than they thought 20 years ago.
The industry also incorporates safety data from international studies. In tests involving a major propane gas explosion and a jet engine rotor traveling at near supersonic speed, again, the containers would have fully protected the fuel rods. Another facet of public safety involves the integrated planning process for shipments. This includes a coordinated approach among federal, state, and local officials. Federal authorities establish specific guidelines for the safest possible shipment of used fuel.
One of the first aspects of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's actions is to approve any route over which used nuclear fuel might travel, and examines these routes to make sure that the shipments will be secure. Armed escorts are required in urban areas. In addition, some states require escorts throughout their state.
State and local authorities issue permits to shippers, conduct safety inspections of trains and trucks, and coordinate emergency preparedness efforts.
DOE and other organizations have given us a lot of studies and have picked routes that has the minimal impact on large municipal areas and to bypass big cities. And I think that the key is to move this material safely from point A to point B.
State and local authorities carefully monitor shipping routes, including satellite tracking, so they will always know exactly where shipments are at any minute.
The precautions that go into spent nuclear fuel transport, whether it be the design and engineering that goes into package production, or the other precautions that are taken, the inspections that are done on the transport vehicles, radiological surveys, and confirmation of compliance with DOT regulations, makes spent fuel transport a safe activity.
Used nuclear fuel is a solid material. It is not flammable and it cannot explode. In the event of a transportation accident, there would be no explosion as a result of the nuclear materials being present. In the event of a train accident involving a used nuclear transportation container, the containers are designed to withstand high-temperature fires. In addition, the containers present a moving target, making them an unlikely choice for a terrorist attack.
As the country's plan for disposing of used nuclear fuel moves forward, the proven record of safe transportation of used nuclear fuel ensures the highest levels of protection to the public and the environment.
Between the years 2007 and 2031, the United States Department of Energy plans on storing high-level nuclear waste in a repository at a location known as Yucca Mountain. This locale is only 100 miles from Clark County and the city of Las Vegas. In early 2001, a county-wide impact study was conducted by Urban Environmental Research, and the following presentation offers just some of the results. The study looked at three key factors that would be directly affected by the Yucca Mountain project: the gaming industry, Clark County property values, and government services. When 14 major casino executives were asked about the impact on the gaming industry as a result of the Yucca Mountain project, the answer was unanimous. There is a concern that an accident, even a minor one along a route in Clark County, could have a devastating impact on their business. They also expressed that any downturn in business has a direct negative effect on the entire local economy. Insurance was another major concern. The gaming industry has no insurance that covers nuclear waste incidents. Other concerns were the cost of capital, the quality of life for themselves and their employees, as well as their guests. One major concern was there is no emergency response in place to handle evacuation procedures following a nuclear waste accident. The study then examined property values in Clark County. Property values are important to both personal homeowners and government agencies. And it's important to note that many government services use property taxes for services. Any downturn in property values can negatively affect both the private and the public sector. The study surveyed people throughout the valley. 82% felt there would be a decrease in values as a result of nuclear waste traveling through Clark County. 75% would be unwilling to purchase a home under any condition along the transportation corridor. While 35% of businesses believed there would be little or perhaps a positive impact, 65% of business surveyed thought there would definitely be adverse effects. The study also surveyed 18 banks, 35 certified appraisers, and other agencies that have been working and estimating property values for over a decade in Clark County. They were asked, what's going to happen to residential property, commercial office buildings, and warehouse distribution facilities near the I-15 Beltway corridor? They found that even without any kind of incident, property values losses will range near $470 million, and in some places, $650 million. What if there was a minor accident in the transportation of the high-level nuclear waste? Just the negative publicity that accompanies such a situation alone could result in losses that could reach $1.2 to $1.6 billion. And in the case of a serious accident, estimated $6.6 to $8.8 billion. 24 Clark County public agencies were surveyed, including the City of Las Vegas, the City of North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Boulder City. Those agencies were asked about how the Yucca Mountain project would affect their daily services like police, fire, emergency response, and so forth. The results were staggering. Clark County estimates $275 million in costs. The City of Las Vegas, $43 million in costs. $23 million in the North Las Vegas area. And $7 million in Mesquite. 21 Clark County agencies were asked about the impacts their departments would face as a result of the nuclear waste shipments. $20 million for training, $13 million in equipment costs, $6.3 million for personnel. Over the 24-year duration of the Yucca Mountain program, these figures range from $96.6 million in 2007 to $2.7 billion in 2031. These figures do not include equipment costs, capital facility, or transportation improvements.
The industry itself has long been concerned and have tried to figure their way through this. The Holtec company that's providing the cask for Vermont Yankee, it's called the High Storm 100. They also came up with a model about 5 years ago, I think, called the Whole Storm 100U. And the U model is just that. It's meant to be buried with just this small portion of the top of it sticking above the ground, with vents in the ground and so on. This is a design that borrows heavily on designs that activists had put together. So, you know, it's not, the president of the company of Holtec said, this is just the next level of protection. It's not necessary, mind you, they're safe now, but this is just a next level of protection. So those concerns are there, and they're real, and I would suggest looking at them. Yeah.
What would be the consequence of an attack like that on a cask? I mean, would it result in a fire that would then, result in radioactive plume, or what would the real consequence of that be compared to, obviously, a fire at a spent fuel pool?
Based on the transportation studies where they had a projectile that went through the cask, and I think they were talking about a high-velocity rifle bullet going through one of the transportation casks. They projected, envisioned, they based their study on having that famous 1 tablespoon of material spit out on the ground outside the cask. And that would have resulted in the contamination at dangerous levels of about 42 square miles of surrounding countryside. If it were ejected in an urban setting, the cost of cleanup would be around $500 million. The number of illnesses, we'll call them fatalities, they figure it would be about 14, and the maximally exposed people would be the workers who came to try to put the genie back in the bottle.
And these estimates originate from the industry itself?
Sandia Labs. You can find them on the State of Nevada nuclear waste website. Yeah, and I should comment that the hole that was blown in that cask and the hole that would be blown in using any real contemporary shoulder-launched missile would probably not be less than 1 inch in diameter. It would probably be several inches in diameter, and the amount of material blown out of the cask would be that much correspondingly larger. So yeah.
Steve. Yes. Getting back to the current situation we face vis-a-vis the various power relationships, so on and so forth, what the New England Coalition is doing, what other people should be doing. What are your ideas on how to proceed, what to do, where are we, this sort of thing, because I think it's really important.
My personal view, personal experience is that you get as close to the company as you can. Put together a forum, invite them to come and debate their choices.
Ooh.
Try to pull them in so that you can access them. This is why I've said in public that I like litigation, but I don't really. I don't think anybody does. But this is why we litigate, because this is the only place that we can get them on the record, make them try to prove what they're saying. And we're not always successful at that. But it's the only place where I see this really happening. Had the company put together a advisory panel, then there would be the moral suasion of the host and the guest would say, well, you invited me here, how about telling me the truth? Let's discuss it. And there would be some hold there, the social level. Other than that, the legal level. And at the legal level too, the longer any of these proceedings go on, the more the company might be inclined to give up some things in order to get peace in the valley. So, yeah.
If we would, is someone else over there? You want to go? Would you like to speak first? I was just gonna ask about the discovery. Are they under oath if there was to be a discovery?
Yes.
And would that stop them from lying?
They would, yes and no, they'd avoid as much risk as they could. And so, you know, this is a constant struggle. This is, you know, Vermont Yankee's been here since 1971. I've been inside it when it's been operating. I've walked the grounds. NEC had a team go on site and take radiological samples when they were going to build their temporary rotor building. However, you know, in the community, how many people got anything other than a prepared, polished little tour, and very few of those. So, you know, what we've seen, when you get into it, okay, what happens is, like, information comes tumbling out, and if you go after it. Otherwise, and I don't know about other industries, I only know about the nuclear industry. It's like a big fat clam, and it's shut tight, and you can't get information in or out without some extraordinary means. And for us, it proved to be litigation, getting involved in the process. They've altered the process now to pretty much exclude everybody, and what's left are small bits and pieces, and they may or may not work. That's what we're going to try, but...
Steve, does that answer you?
Well,
do you want to follow up?
So we're excluded, and litigation is a way of trying to open the door. My feeling is that if there's this widespread feeling of us being excluded from a process, that needs to manifest itself in various ways. I think it's very clear that they were very successful in pretty much between the NRC and the entity and so on, pretty much saying, all right, we're going to have it our way, and there's a few little window dressings, so on and so forth. Does that mean we should just kind of say it's a fait accompli and they won? Or, I mean, I agree with you, litigation and so on is important. Are people aware of the issues that are at stake? I mean, what are the various aspects of is community education important at this point? Obviously this meeting is an indication that it probably is, but I mean, is the amount of effort going into the task equal to the size of the problem? These are just, questions I have, and I don't expect Ray Shadis to have all the answers.
I don't have
nor does he, claim to.
I'm kind of raising my own questions, but I do want to say one thing so it's not misunderstood. Okay? There have been many different approaches to dealing with Vermont Yankee, including the political civil approach, trying to take it out of the hands of NRC, take it to the state level, get the legislature involved, and if nothing else, that was very effective at driving a wedge between the state and the company. You understand, prior to that, there was no way of questioning VY at the state level until it became a political issue, and the people that did that did a remarkable job. The one thing about these plants is both the energy and the plant tend to be invisible. So, getting a placard or a poster or banner or something and walking down there and making the plant visible, including the corporate headquarters up here, Ferry Road. Nobody ever thinks of that place. You know, how is that going to be redeveloped? What legal, political hold does the community have on the company at that site? So, you know, anyway, I just want to say that I'm really personally appreciative of the intelligence and the energy that went into all those efforts.
It would seem to me that if for some reason or another the decommissioning fund doesn't cover the decommissioning, then the community or the state, whatever, should require that the future sale of that property up there on Old Ferry Road should go into the decommissioning fund. That extra $600,000 or whatever it is should belongs to fixing that place up.
They probably won't be able to sell it for very much until it's cleaned up.
No, I'm talking about the corporate offices.
Head offices up on Ferry Road.
That's a nice little spot there.
Yeah.
That's $1 million.
Tom.
So we started the conversation, I think, with how do we get this thing decommissioned now rather than go into safe store? I think the NRC has been pretty clear in it's the plant's option. It's not something that we can force. And the state has been very clear about that too. The state and the Entergy have an agreement that it can go into safe store. So I think the bigger issue is how do we shorten that period of safe store? One of the ways to do that is protect the decommissioning fund to make sure that it remains solvent and whole, and that Entergy is not raiding it for its own purposes or for frivolous uses. So there are several places, several pinch points at the state level that are available to deal with this at the PSB. Y'all can make a difference there, I think, and you can use those pinch points to get information through the discovery process. The first of those is docket 8300, which is the new spent fuel storage pad docket. It's in limbo right now. It will probably open up sometime fairly shortly. And that's an important place for your organization to participate. Second point is that the most recent CPG case contemplates, docket 7862, contemplates a process in 2015 to determine site restoration standards. So it's important to hold the board responsible for that, to make sure the board actually holds hearings that will determine site restoration standards. And the third point is docket 6545, the original sale docket, contemplated a process by which the Public Service Board would review expenses in some form. That Entergy is allowed to take money out of the decommissioning trust fund for decommissioning and overhead costs. And that's about it. So the question is, what else might they be taking money out for? And how do you review those takeaways? For example, Entergy has said that they can take money out of the decommissioning fund for litigation expenses. Right. Well, that's not a decommissioning expense, so how do you argue that to the Public Service Board? Entergy has entered into an agreement with the town of Vernon for tax stabilization. Well, their decommissioning plans and budgets didn't include that. Entergy said that taxes would be paid based on vacant land value. So suddenly they've done this sweetheart deal with the town of Vernon that does great things for Vernon, but draws down the fund at the same time. So you have an opportunity there to go before the board and say, we need the board to review all of these withdrawals and make sure they comply with the docket 6545 MOU that restricts those withdrawals to decommissioning costs. So those are three places where y'all can play before the Public Service Board and I think have some kind of impact.
Now, are you talking about the Public Service Board assigning a third party to oversee withdrawals from the decommissioning fund, or the Public Service Board overseeing the withdrawals?
It's unclear what the process might be. The MOU simply says that they can withdraw money for these purposes only.
Right.
But there's no process for how to determine what those are. They must tell the Department of Public Service what they've taken money out for. And they've done that in this first round of withdrawals. But there's no way for us right now, for the public, to review what those costs are.
And if they find the costs are not in compliance, then what is DPS?
Well, there's Department of Public Service and Public Service Board.
Then they go back to the Public Service Board.
Right. So I think you need to
Right.
establish a process at the Public Service Board for that function. And it may be a hearing officer that's appointed for a long period of time to review this publicly. But that's a place where you can get information out of them about what they're spending that money on.
Perhaps. It could also be helpful to have folks take a common sense view of those various orders and agreements. You know, Entergy stepped back from their agreement not to invoke preemption by saying that the legislature's involvement changed the rules of the game. Therefore, all bets are off, and they were now invoking preemption at every turn. I don't know what events were, not contemplated at the time on Entergy's part. Entergy is drawing on this fund for operations, post-shutdown operations. If that doesn't void the agreement, we may go back to establishing a new agreement that truncates the period of safe store. It was left to Entergy to determine when there was sufficient money to decommission. We tried to get the board to look at that. I think everybody was so glad to be rid of Entergy, hopefully, that any deal would have flown. But those things can be revisited if you find the right reasons.
But the only leverage we had at that time was whether or not they would get a license to operate through whenever it was.
2012.
2012. Well, no, through
Sally,
2014.
yeah, they
So,
were going to operate
how could we
with or
come back to
without the license. They declared themselves capable of doing that, and they were going to do it. So I think that the issue was whether they were going to get a CPG or not.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
And the basis for denying the CPG on the part of the Department of Public Service was that they were really a reprehensible, untrustworthy company.
Right, the fair
and
trade, right.
they could not take that to the proceedings in New York or to any other place.
They couldn't take
I
it to
think
their
they were
stock
very, very much concerned with not being tarred.
Right, but what they've done
$10 million worth.
is I mean, if you read that decision, it's based on the notion that the decommissioning fund will be ripe in, what does it say, 2025 or something like that, in 10 or 15 years. And now Entergy is saying they're not planning to do anything until 2052. So as soon as they got their CPG and shut down, the agreement is gone. Their end of it is gone, the way they have done with most of the agreements that they've made. So how can we go back to the PSB after the leverage is, the horse is out of the barn, and say we need to revisit that agreement or any agreement? Because, I mean, what incentive does Entergy have to engage with us? They could just say, tough luck, Charlie.
Well, a CPG can be modified or revoked.
Right, but you can't revoke, yes, you have a permit to operate until whatever the day
End
was.
of 2014. No, but you can revoke, yes, you're a nice guy.
Right, the fair
So,
trade.
so, I think you make good points, and it bears examination, it bears thinking about and discussion. I hope that at some point in the near term, in the next couple of weeks or so, that we can have another meeting like this, except I won't be there. I'd be glad to see people who are interested or alive, which we call activists as opposed to pacifists, get together in this community, and you have a good base here to be talking about, how can we apply leverage? Can we use moral suasion? What about petitioning the New York Public Service Commission, requesting that they do not reward Entergy for what they've done to the state of Vermont? I don't know. Avenues for moral suasion. I suggested calling on them to debate some of these issues.
Want to go to Tom?
Yeah, I haven't heard Entergy renege on their commitment to decommission the plant as soon as the fund is whole. They said in the MOU and the settlement agreement that when the fund is sufficient by their standard, they will begin the process. And I think they're sticking by that still.
Yeah,
what
but they've said a lot of different dates in various documents.
But what they're saying is,
and
what they're saying is when the fund is sufficient, we'll do that. Now, for the purpose of planning, we're going to assume that the fund isn't sufficient until 2052 or whatever the date is. That's a planning document. It's not a when we're going to do it document. So I think they're still holding to their original agreement. The question is, when does the fund grow sufficiently? And there are two funds we have to worry about, the decommissioning trust fund and the site restoration fund, and they're different. And a third piece of that is spent fuel management costs, and whether those get withdrawn from the fund or not. So I think Entergy has been consistent. I haven't heard inconsistency in their commitment to decommission when the fund is whole. It just appears that way if you look at the...
Yeah, I mean, there's just been a lot of contradictory dates given in various documents.
Yeah, they're primarily planning documents for worst-case scenario, is the way they're presenting it, I think.
Well, and also what they say in the press is, probably sometime around 2052, and, if we're not done by 2060, tough luck, Charlie, we're out of here.
Yeah, we're done.
We're out of here.
And that's a giant hole in the whole process. What happens if the fund doesn't grow sufficiently?
Or if it takes longer. They've found
Or if it's
giant
depleted
pools of
as-
strontium-90 underneath the ground and inches away from the Vernon Aquifer, and it's going to take years, and,
Sure, there are lots of issues there that have
Right.
to be explored.
Well, and I think there's another elephant in the room that I brought up at Chris Recchio's little meeting room up in Montpelier, and Chris Harris was there from camp, and he said, that's really maybe the way to go. I mean, Arjun Makajani says about the canisters, we're just going to keep Russian dolls, just keep putting overpack over overpack over overpack. But as far as actually taking this bull by the horns, I mean, it's the Kurt Dames approach. You have to find a way to take back the plant with the decommissioning fund and say, look, we don't want to wait till 2052. We want Vermont to be cleaned up. And we're tired of it waiting and having Entergy lead us around by the nose. We're going to kick them out, however that might be done, either revoke their CPG or eminent domain, or send the Vermont militia down there. One way or the other, take the money and clean it up ourselves and hire a team, maybe the guys in Zion who can do it for half as much, or the guys in Germany, or Ray Shadis and company, or somebody to do it ourselves and to take it over and bond for it out of general fund revenue or the gas tax or maple syrup tax or something.
My wife would suggest I take care of the 8 dead cars first.
Right.
But,
well, so while you're doing on that, we'll do eminent domain, and when you get done with your 8 dead cars, we'll put you down on Vermont Yankee. But I mean, that's never talked about because people are loath to think that, oh my God, these Entergy nuclear operators, they're fabulously rich. They can have it, make them pay. But if you try to get the rich guy to pay, you're never going to get the thing done.
No,
and
they'll
the way
spend
things
all
get
that
done
money
is somebody steps
trying
up,
not to.
writes a check, and gets it done. And that's the way things happen. And if that means that we have a special tax on Vermont homesteads over $1 million or whatever process, that may be a better way to proceed and sort of get in charge of your own destiny than waiting for energy to maybe not, maybe do, yeah, maybe they haven't reneged. They're consistently dissembling is what they are. They're, you know, and so you can say they're being consistent. Well, that means because they haven't lied again yet. But, you know, but as soon as it benefits them to lie, to put it out to 2060 or 2140 or 2380, they'll do it, in my opinion. My humble opinion.
Can you repeat those three things, just like bullet points? There's the ISFSI, docket 8300.
Docket 8300, docket 7862, the most recent CPG docket contemplates hearings in 2015 for site restoration standards, and that's in the order. And docket 6545 MOU contemplates some sort of PSB review for expenses to assure that they are actual decommissioning expenses, where it at least assures that it requires that the expense money be used for decommissioning. And there needs to be some oversight in that docket.
Thank you. Someone, Ray, you said?
Yeah, I was wondering, wasn't there a proviso in the MOU saying that Entergy had written in that they could no longer be taken to court?
That was in the
Or
settlement.
they could no longer be that the state would no longer have any lawsuits against them or something like that?
Those existing suits, they were
Yeah.
dropped on both sides.
Oh, I see.
That all that litigation that was going on, in which the state was taking the beating anyway, was all dropped.
But the state is contemplating new litigation over the use of the fund. That's what Rick is on record to say.
The state has filed for intervening at NRC, which is litigation. So, yeah, that was then, this is now.
Richard.
Richard Evers. I am kind of haunted by the Arnie Gunderson's talk at the Quality Inn the other night. I profess to be one of the least informed people with the nuts and bolts of the hard facts on the ground in this room. But what he talked about, and this was, of course, stuff that's come out after, about strontium-90 that's come after the agreement with the state. And he talked about, he used that phrase, horse out of the barn, and he talked about a building, I think, being removed. He said, and this is where I'm on shaky ground, but I bet other people in this room know what he's talking about better, where he talked about that building needs to be removed and before the horse is out of the barn. In other words, that there's an urgent need to remediate things that have come to light after the agreement with the state, after Shumlin's agreement. And I wondered if that's needs to be talked about, and whether that could be a point for litigation or pressure on representatives or whatever, that this is sort of urgent and new. This is a new problem that hasn't been. If Arnie Gunderson's right, and he usually is, I just wondered if other people had any thoughts about that, about the strontium-90 leak and other things that are possibly in the ground, that are spreading, that could be addressed immediately, that need to be addressed immediately. The way he talked about it, I've been thinking about it ever since I heard him say it, but I don't comprehend it very well.
It's basically, we know what's there in terms of contamination.
We know
We know that
We know
there
the tip of
is
the
some
iceberg.
contamination in these places. Clean it up now. Don't wait. If you wait, it will spread.
Right.
That's Arnie's argument. Right. And they're talking about the AOG building as one of the,
Advanced off-gas.
right, the advanced off-gas building, right?
Yep.
But wasn't it, he said that it was at Haddam Neck, or I forget which plant he said that strontium was found, and it really, upped the ante on the decommissioning cost once that strontium turned up. Do you remember?
It practically doubled it, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it was having that.
But yet that hasn't been discussed at all, even in the, I mean, I'm
It's a Connecticut
interested in what
Yankee.
you think about this, you know, the advisory panel, handicap, which, you know, I've been going to those meetings, and it really doesn't feel like anything's substantive happening at those meetings. They have their first visitor coming, expert on casks, 6 months into the game, this month.
I don't think they've done any tours.
And they haven't done any tours at all, and I'm just wondering, like, you know, you're sitting there wondering, what is the role of handicap at all? Particularly since Entergy is part of it, because they don't seem, they seem afraid of speaking out or representing the very interests that they're supposed to be representing, because it's this, like, you know, happy feeling with Entergy for a while. I don't really know. I'm curious what your impression is of what's going on there in terms of the citizen advisory.
My understanding at a distance is that their responsibility is to get information and report out to the legislature about decommissioning. They're not there to advise the company. They really have no advisory role. Really is just like the Vermont State Nuclear Advisory Panel. They were advising the legislature, not the company. That's my view of that. A really interesting point about the strontium. NRC gives and NRC takes away. 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of these years telescope for me, so please excuse me if I'm not precise on the year. I've been focused on Vermont Yankee exclusively since 2001. So it's a lot of pile up. NRC 5 or 6 years ago said that they were concerned about leaving radiation, and they were contemplating a rule that would require companies to assay contamination and cleanup prior to decommissioning. And they even used the term orphan sites. They didn't want stuff left. They didn't want stuff spreading. Okay. I think it'd be very good to remind NRC of that. Possibly with a safety petition, a 2206, as they're called, petition, to try to get them to enforce cleanup of the strontium that they said off the cuff. They have no idea where it came from or how much there is or where it's spreading, but they said they don't see any need to clean it up right away. Okay? This is in direct contradiction to what they were sending out memos about and they were concerned about 5 or 6 years ago. You know, this is what I mean by NRC giving and taking away. They say some astounding things from time to time, and then they immediately start equivocating and backing off from it. But that issue might well be raised with them.
Jim?
Yeah, when I listened to that panel, the thing that was substantive to me is that there was one question, I forget which it was, but basically it was someone involved in litigation, and the manager for Energy just dodged it and basically wouldn't answer the question. He kept saying that this is an open and transparent process, but that once you got down to a question that had a substantive answer, he really wouldn't answer it. So I think that's a really, I have some degree of sympathy. I mean, Chris Recchio was talking about that he shouldn't say something because the lawyers would give him a hard time. I mean, the lawyers are in the room, but how you have a public process when both people are postures for a lawsuit or a future lawsuit, I think is a very, very difficult thing, because basically you're not going to get much information. You're almost going to you're almost gonna force people to sue you. And the hope is, for energy part, is that the Vermont community or theoretically the well-heeled anti-nuclear community is finally run out of money and won't be able to entertain any real lawsuits or discovery motions. So that's sort of where we are. Puts the state and that committee in a very difficult situation.
Do you think that a consortium of local organizations might be able to pull that forum away from the CAP or whatever it's called?
No, it doesn't need, I think they'll do, they'll do what they're gonna do. I mean, it is a group, and there are representatives. There's a lot of people who I think are involved with it, who are appointed by the state, who maybe wouldn't normally be involved with it. They're gonna get frustrated like we're all frustrated with it.
I think
So,
they're beginning to really get,
What?
they're really beginning to have powerless.
I mean, you look at, I haven't seen the main slides before, but you look at that industrial operation, and you realize how complicated this thing, the amount of material. How big was main Yankee, how many?
800 megawatt plant.
So it's slightly larger than Yankee.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but anyway, but it's a big thing.
Sort of getting back to what Ray was talking about with what are the processes or procedures that we might use to get NRC to revisit this whole state safe store idea vis-a-vis Vermont Yankee. And you mentioned the 2.206 petition. There's also the rulemaking petition. We might be able to argue that because this is a merchant plant and not something that the ratepayers are ultimately going to be held responsible for, safe store is a whole different ballgame. The third question is there some way to argue similarly to how the Mothers for Peace in San Luis Obispo brought down the waste confidence rule through litigation? Is there some way for us to say that a generic ruling on decommissioning, when every site is different, I mean, we know there's a pool of strontium-90 sitting there now, that violates NEPA. But do you have to go through some other administrative procedural hoops before you can bring that kind of a litigation?
Maybe not, but I just want to mention the state's response testimony on this EPZ thing, where the state wanted to maintain it and the company wanted to throw it out, and NRC decided to throw it out. The state's response in that listed 2 or 3 different things about Vermont Yankee that makes it different. Leslie had a good letter in the Sentinel and pointed out a couple of things that made Vermont Yankee a special case.
Non-generic.
Right.
And I think Debbie stood up at one of the meetings and talked about
Proximity
this decommissioning
to the
in the middle
school.
of a village, and so on. There's for folks to get together and think about that, because I think you could develop a real good argument for why that rule giving the company sole option is not a good rule in this case, and therefore should be altered to allow exceptions and to allow the citizens to, or the affected parties to bring forward some of these issues. In other words, for a hearing opportunity at the beginning, not the end of decommissioning. Something like that. But, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on here. Clay, we need Clay to bring it all together, or someone.
Thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed the program. It was wonderful feedback from everybody, and think a lot of good ideas were generated tonight. So thank you very much.